Greetings everyone, welcome to another episode of Baking with Mike. Today we're going to make one of my favorites, chocolate chip cookies. It's a great staple recipe to have, and this is my favorite chocolate chip cookie recipe. So let's begin. Along the way, I'm going to give you a few tips to make extra good chewy cookies. You start by preheating your oven to 360 degrees, kind of a weird temperature, but it actually works really well for these cookies. One thing you want to make sure of is that your oven's set up perfectly. You want your rack in the middle of the oven. So let me show you what I mean. Up high is where all the heat goes. Down low, it gets a little cold. The best circulation is right in the middle here. So you can see I have my tray set in the middle of the oven. Try to do that before you turn on your oven, and then you won't even need oven mitts to kind of move the trays. So we're going to let that heat up. We're going to get started on our recipe over here. You begin by creaming together butter and sugar. So creaming, when you see that in a recipe, all that means is you're mixing the butter with the sugar. That's what creaming is. You can use a hand mixer or a stand mixer. If you have a stand mixer, that's great. I'm going to use this hand mixer. And our recipe calls for 2 sticks of butter. So you take out the wrappers. You want it to be soft, room temperature, but not liquid. If it's liquid, your cookies will kind of have the wrong consistency. I planned ahead. I kind of let my butter come to room temperature over time. If you don't do that, you can soften it in the microwave. Just make sure you don't liquefy it. So I have those two. And into that, I'm going to add half a cup of granulated sugar. So granulated sugar is table sugar. It looks like this. I'm going to take my half cup measure. And then with the flat side of a knife, so this side here, I'm just going to level my measurement and make sure it's nice and even. Baking's really a lot of chemical reactions. You want to make sure your measurements are exact. So I have exactly a level half cup here of white sugar. And then I'm also going to add some dark brown sugar. So there's a couple of reasons for this. Brown sugar kind of adds some chewiness to our cookies. It adds a lot of good texture to our cookies. And it helps with the chemical reactions, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So our recipe says 1.5 cups packed. So packed means you really want to jam it in the cup. You don't want it loose. So when I just scoop, you can see it sort of like loose, and you can see little bits of air. Use the side of the bag and just press it in as hard as you can. So this is our half. You can see it even holds its shape when you put it into the bowl. And then we're going to add our 1 cup. We're using the side of the bag to pack it in. Now we are going to cream our cookie batter, the butter and the sugar. And you cream these together before you add any other ingredients. And actually, you want to cream these for 2 to 3 minutes. It might seem like a long time, but what that does is it creates really fluffy, really chewy cookies. And you want to do this mixing before you add things like eggs and dry ingredients, because those will kind of make tough cookies if you do a lot of mixing. Then you do the creaming in the beginning. So I'm going to start at a lower speed and then crank it up once things kind of get mixed. You might get dough or cookie dough stuck in these mixers, and you can use a butter knife and sort of scrape it out like this. Next, you're going to add your eggs one at a time, so 2 eggs. Crack on the bowl. You do not want to get egg all over your countertop. So that's 1. And then mix that one in. number 2. The next thing that we're going to add is vanilla. 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. Vanilla is a strong flavor, so what you want to do is you want to make sure that you don't add too much. Because of that, I always like to measure to the side of the bowl. If I spill, which obviously I'm going to try not to, I'd rather spill on the counter where I can clean it up than into my batter where I kind of ruin the chemistry. So hold it steady and you're just going to pour into here. 1 teaspoon. 2 teaspoons. And mix it in. Okay, it's going to be time to say goodbye to our mixer. We're going to start to add the dry ingredients, and the batter is going to get too tough for these guys. So take a knife, clean them off. Might help to eject them. If you're using a stand mixer, you can keep using that throughout. Just make sure you adjust the speed. Once you've got most of the dough off, you just put these in the sink. Resist the temptation to lick it. This has raw egg in it. You really don't want to be eating raw egg, even though it'll probably taste really good. It's not a good choice. Take a spatula and scrape down the sides of your bowl. We're now going to add our dry ingredients, like our flour, baking soda, baking powder, and salt. We're going to start with our all-purpose flour. You're going to add 2 3/4 cups. So start with the 1 cups. Scoop. And then level. One. 2. They don't make a 3/4 cup measure, so you have to do some math. You're going to do a 1/2 cup and then a 1/4 cup. So the 1/2 cup. And then our 4th cup. Again, we don't want to use a mixer for this. It's going to be too tough. So take a wooden spoon and we're going to use that to mix. So you're going to stir in the flour. If you're using a stand mixer, you can use the paddle attachment. You're going to want to keep mixing until all your dry ingredients are absorbed. So that could take a little while. Once it gets further along, you can actually use your hands. Just make sure they're clean. Next, we're going to add baking powder and baking soda. These are what you call leavening agents. They help the cookies kind of rise and create airiness. For these to work, they need something sort of acidic in the mix. And what we added that was sort of acidic is brown sugar. Brown sugar has molasses, and that has a chemical reaction with these ingredients that causes the cookies to kind of rise and become fluffy. So we're going to add 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder. So you're gonna take a knife and level it. That's 1 teaspoon. And we're gonna add the 1/2 teaspoon. Next, we're gonna add the baking soda. So we're gonna add 1 teaspoon of that. What's cool about these boxes, you can see this little wedge here. That helps you level, you don't even need the knife. You just sort of dip in and scrape along this edge. And it levels it for you. The last thing we're gonna add is some salt. So 3/4 teaspoon of salt. Just like before, you have to do a little bit of math. You don't have a measurement that's 3/4, so you're gonna add a 1/2 teaspoon and then a 1/4 teaspoon. So we'll do the 1/2, and again, this helps you level. If not, you can use a knife if you don't have a container that does that. So 1/2. And 1/4. Each of these ingredients that we're adding, like the baking soda, the salt, the flour, they all play a role in the chemistry of baking. So I'm going to put a document in the classroom that sort of walks you through some of those details if you're interested in the chemistry of it. Meanwhile, we're going to mix these ingredients in. So I'm taking my spoon and stirring everything together. You can use the spoon to scrape the sides. The next thing we're going to add is 2 1/4 cup of semi-sweet chocolate chips. Probably easiest to pour these, so take your 1 cup, fill it to the top. One. Two. And 1/4. Now take your spoon and gently fold them in. Folding means to kind of turn with the spoon and just sort of let the ingredients mix. So that's what we mean when we say folding in a recipe. We're gonna get our trays ready next. You don't want to grease them. If you grease the trays, what happens is the grease sort of makes the cookies spread out more and you get these kind of flat, hard cookies. Instead, what we're gonna do is use parchment paper, and that'll just sort of help the cookies not make a mess on our tray, and they're not gonna stick because there's enough butter in here to kind of grease themselves. So you take your parchment paper, line it up, going lengthwise on the tray. And you just sort of press it down. If it kind of comes up a little bit, that's okay. The cookies are actually going to weigh it down. So you're going to want exact size scoops. If you have a small scoop for cookies, you can use that. What works just as well as a big tablespoon. So I'm going to go grab a tablespoon and I'll sort of show you how to scoop the cookie dough. Having a scoop like this helps you get even sized cookies. The reason you want even sized cookies is not just about fairness. It's about the cookies all cooking at the same time in the oven. If you have a really small cookie and a really big cookie, one's gonna be raw, the other one's gonna be burnt. So it's more about that. Get a spoonful of dough, kind of like this. Flop it down here on the tray. And then you want to have about 2 inches between cookies, and that's because they're going to spread out during baking. You don't want to have one big cookie, right? We're not going for Pinterest fails here. So I'm keeping my spacing. Might have to do more batches, but that's okay. Might be hard to see in the video, but the size of these cookie drops is about 2 tablespoons. So I'm filling up the spoon and then some, and that's about 2 tablespoons of dough per cookie. I cook these trays one at a time just because I want them to all be in the middle of the oven. My oven's not big enough to fit 2 side by side, so we'll just do one at a time, 15 minutes. Slide it in. Set my timer. What you want to see is you want to see cookies that are kind of golden brown when they come out. So, see you in 15 minutes. Meanwhile, I'm gonna get my second tray ready. I have my first batch still in the oven. I'm getting my other trays ready. All right, and your timer goes off. Time to check. You wanna see that they're golden brown. It's better to undercook than to overcook your cookies. You're actually gonna leave them on the tray for 2 minutes and they continue to cook while they're on this tray. What I love about the parchment paper is once that 2 minutes is up, you can just pull the parchment paper off and the cookies come with it. So you don't need to lift them off with a spatula when they're so hot and gooey. Setting a timer for 2 minutes. Meanwhile, putting my second tray into the oven. So carefully take your parchment and just slide your cookies off and let them continue to cool on this parchment paper. Once your cookies are still warm, not falling apart, but still warm, it's the best time to enjoy them. So you can have them with milk, with ice cream. I love having them with a nice cup of coffee. I hope you enjoy.